Good evening. My name is Pastor Kathy Light, and I am the pastor here at Elm Street Congregational Church in Southbridge, Massachusetts. And I welcome you to our third installment of A Story, Tell Me a Story, Jacob and His Wives. We're going to do a few things tonight. The first thing I want to do is that we have been talking about this idea of midrash, about creating a story around the stories that are in the Bible. We're talking about this also on Wednesday nights with Genesis story. But on Tuesday nights, we're doing Jacob and his wives because it's a fascinating story about ethics and morals and trickery and deceit and love and longing and heartache and blessings and what those things all might mean. And one of the things that we've been talking about doing as a children's book or a comic book or stories, and one of the things I talked about last time was actually working on diary entries or journal entries for different characters. And I have written a first journal entry for the character of Laban. So Laban is Jacob's uncle, and he is meeting Jacob for the first time. And so he's writing down about their first meeting. So this is his first entry. It's lambing time again, and we are swamped. Two of our shepherds have disappeared, and my daughters, Leah and little Rachel, who's only 11, have pitched in helping with the flock. Each morning for a week, I have been praying that God will send us some help. Well, God has answered my prayers. He has heard my cry, and this very day he sent someone to help with our labor. And not just a stranger, no. He sends my own nephew, my sister Rebecca's son, Jacob. He's showed up this evening as the herds gathered at the well, and he is so strong that he rolled the stone away from the well single-handedly. He was asking if anyone there had heard of me, not knowing that one of the flocks was mine. When the other shepherds pointed out my flocks, and that Rachel was hurting, he rolled the stone away, and I think he might have been showing off just a bit, as young men are wont to do. He introduced himself to my daughter, and as soon as I met him, I saw him, I would have known him anywhere. He had such the look of his mother, and it has been some 20 years since I have seen her. I embraced him and kissed him and welcomed him into my home. And tomorrow night we will have a celebration and Jacob will tell us his story. So that is the first entry for Jacob's journal. So I'm going to write a couple more entries. I will post them on Facebook and you'll get a chance to look at them. And I want to now talk to you about some of the themes that we've seen so far. So if we would go back before we met Jacob as he is on the run, and if we would read before that, the backstory would be that you remember he stole his brother Esau's blessing from his father Isaac, and then his mother said, "You better not hang around here because your brother is so angry with you." And he said he's going to kill you. So that's a story. We hadn't read that part, but you can go back and read it. And then she doesn't want him to have a Canaanite wife because they're in the land of Canaan. She wants him to go home and marry somebody that she knows. So he then is on his trip to his uncle Laban, which is where we found him. So when we look at this, there's a lot of deception here because Rebecca and Jacob deceive Isaac into giving him the blessing. Then he goes into Laban, and we have to wonder, well, now what kind of relationship is he going to have with Laban? And as we continue to read, we realize that is not very ethical or moral relationship either. And before we go saying, oh, poor Jacob, we have to remember that he has not been an ethical person himself. So there are a lot of questions that come up with these stories that we need to address and really pay attention to, because we live in a world of moral and ethical, I don't want to say disasters right now, but they are disasters. And one of the things that we know as Christians, when we read these stories as Christians, we know that Jesus encourages us to be truthful, and that truth is love. So when we look back at these stories, we can look at them as comedies or dramas or dramedies. But we also can look at them and see where relationships that we have might fall into these and do what psychologists call family systems. And maybe we will do a family systems chart to look at what goes on in this family, and the things that keep happening in families generation after generation, they just repeat. So if your family story looks like your grandmother's family story, that's because we repeat our family stories. So with that, I want to read the next part of this text. This is chapter 31 in Genesis, and it's I'm reading from the NRSV, New Revised Standard Version. And this is, so remember the last time we left, Jacob had manipulated the flocks with the different spotted and striped sticks so that spotted and striped lambs would be born, and those would be his. And the regular lambs would be Laban's. And Laban took out all of the spotted ones first, so there wouldn't be any spotted ones to breed, but still God fixed it so that there would be these spotted and striped lambs. So he's done that for a while. He has served his time for both wives, at least 14 years, or I think we're going to find out that it's actually 20 years that he's been there. So now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's. He has gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him as favorably as he did before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your ancestors and to your kindred, and I'll be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me as favorably as he did before. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flock bore speckled. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given it to me. During the mating of the flock, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw the male goats that leaped upon the flock were striped, speckled, and molted. Then the angel of God said to me in a dream, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the goats that leap on the flock are striped, speckled, and molted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and return to the land of your birth. Then Rachel and Leah answered him, is there any portion of our inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has been using up the money given for us. All the property that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, do whatever God has said for you to do. So Jacob arose and set his children and his wives on camels, and he drove away all his livestock, all the property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean, in that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had, starting out across the Euphrates, and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. So now that comes from chapter 31. It goes from verses 1 all the way through to the end of verse 21. So there are some really cool things about this part of the story that I wanted to show you or to talk to you about. And one is that sometimes God is called the Lord, and sometimes God is called God. Now, this is a big deal. Now, when we were writing in English class and they would say, use different words, don't always use the same word. So instead of saying always Dick did this and Dick did that, you could always say Dick did this, and then if it was your father, then you would use different words to name him. It was father, it was his name Dick, it was so-and-so's brother. You could use different designations. Well, in Genesis, we have two sources coming together. So this is called the documentary hypothesis. And it says that in one source, God is referred to as God, and that would be the Hebrew word Elohim. And in another source, he is referred to as the Lord, which in Hebrew is Yahweh, okay, and which we all say Adonai, but it's Yahweh and Elohim. Now, there is a big difference in this, because whenever you see the word Lord, this is Yahweh, who has a very intimate relationship with people. He will come to Jacob in a dream, and Yahweh, the Lord in English, talks directly to people. He walks with people, he talks to people, he knows them intimately, he is friends with them, he guides them, he cares for them. Whenever you see God, that's the Hebrew word Elohim. And Elohim is the great God, the faraway God. And if you see Elohim, he doesn't actually talk to people. He will send angels. He has emissaries. And so when you see the word God, like in verse 11, it says, then the angel of God said to me in a dream. So what scholars think is happening here is that we have two traditions that are made up this story. We have a tradition where God is seen as the high God and El is the high God. And the other is the tradition of Yahweh, who is the God who walked with Adam and Eve in the garden. And they actually call the Elohim God source the E source, and the Yahweh source the J source. And there's a reason for that in German. I won't go into that now. But so there are different sources in this story. And that's important to know when we're reading something in a careful read, and especially when we're working on midrash to fill in the blanks, to figure out what's going on. So we can get information from the story of the text. You can go online, you can look at some commentaries, you can look up the locations and see what you can find out about the places that are mentioned in this story. I think Pan-Aram is one, and the land of Gilead and the land of Canaan. And you can actually look at pictures of the places so that when you're writing your story, your entry into your story, you can actually add some geography and some landscape and think about what that land smells like. And if you're traveling with camels and sheep and donkeys and children and wives, and are we there yet? Because I'm sure there was plenty of "are we there yet" going on there. This is a huge amount of people, and they're probably not all in a straight line in the caravan like you see going across the desert or in picture cards and things like that. We're talking a whole mass of people moving, camping, stopping. Everybody has to eat, then everybody has to do the thing you do after you eat. And imagine if you went camping with all of your animals and all of your children for weeks. That just sounds crazy. But so the Bible just gives us kind of like the frame, and we have to fill in that other stuff. What did it smell like? What did the food taste like? How did we cook it? How did we take care of our animals? Did we meet with wild animals? Did we have to protect our sheep? Did we have to protect each other from bugs or snakes or not coyotes? I don't know what you have in the desert. Hyenas. I don't know, because I haven't looked that up yet, but I probably ought to, because I want to get that right. Were there lions? Were there tigers? I don't know, but I should probably look up and see what the wild animals in that area in that time period were. It would be very good to do that. So as you are writing, So I'm going to write some more entries for Laban, and I'm going to put them on Facebook. And I hope that you will write some and send them to me, and I can post them too if you would let me, or if you just want to let me read them, that would be great. But we need to think about a lot of things while we're writing these midrashes. So sometimes we just say, oh, well, God blessed Jacob, so it doesn't matter what he does because he's just blessed by God. Well, he is blessed by God, but I'm going to argue it still matters what he does. And I'm going to argue that even though we are Christians and we live a particular life and we have a particular responsibility to respond to God's love. And Jacob needs to respond to God's love too. So what we're looking at in these stories are imperfect people in an imperfect world. And they can actually help us deal with our imperfectness in this imperfect world. So some things to think about when you're writing stories is the change in Laban's attitude about Jacob. So as long as Jacob was working for him, he wasn't going anywhere anytime soon because he was stuck for 7 years and 7 more years. Everything that he did was fine. Laban was good. But when he was up, when his time was up and he could leave, and Laban saw, remember last week, he saw that he was getting wealthier and wealthier. More and more of the sheep were speckled and spotted and molted, and less were plain or black or whatever. That bothered him, right? Because he's seeing all his wealth roll out the door. Nobody likes to see their money roll out the door. It doesn't happen or walk out as in the case of sheep. So we can look at that. We also need to remember that Jacob is not an innocent person. Remember, he conspired with his mother to deceive his father to get the birthright that was for his brother Esau. And that was a big deal. That birthright was a big deal, and that blessing was a big deal. And you can go back, I think it's chapter 27 or 28, and read about that. Because that can come into, so the next journal entry that I'm going to write is about the story that Jacob tells about himself. Now, he's going to tell some of the story, but he's not going to tell the whole story because you don't want to come in and say, well, look, I sold the birthright from my brother and now he's tried to kill me, so I thought I'd run over here and see what happened. You can't say that, right? So he's going to tell the other story. The other story is, well, my mother didn't want me to marry a Canaanite, so she sent me over here to find a wife. And it just so happens Laban has 2 daughters. Light bulb, right? So when you are looking, and I hope you are reading these and looking and engaging in these stories, because these stories are more than just sacred, right? They are about us. They allow us to look at families, at family systems, at characters, and they allow us to do a little projection and do a little thinking and read them like wisdom literature. So what kind of people are we looking at? How are they related to us? How do we live like that? Who do we deceive? How are we about our possessions? Do we understand what this is my favorite, do we understand what biblical marriage is? Because it is not one man and one woman, right? We now know it's 2 women, 2 more women and 1 man. And as we go through the text, we'll find that there's actually 8 forms of biblical marriage. And one of the forms is 1 man and 1 woman. That is true. That's one of the forms, but there are 7 others. So I am so glad that you are here with me and that we are doing this together. And if you have any questions, you can text me or email me. I really appreciate feedback on this. And it looks like we're up at our 20 minutes. So I want to invite you to come tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. We're going to do the Midrash. That is the story about the story Cain and Abel. And we're going to look at 2 brothers that have a hard time getting along and what it means when someone's countenance is fallen. And there'll be all kinds of issues to deal with in that one too. Again, God bless you. And may God open up our hearts and our minds so that we might find joy in his words of the Bible, so that we might be able to bless everyone we come in contact. Would you pray with me? Holy God, our Father and our Mother, thank you for these stories that you have given us so that we might come out of our ordinary time and for just a moment come into the sacredness and share these stories that people for thousands of years have heard. May we find new meaning in them for ourselves. May we help to write the story for the next generation. And may we continue to be your disciples. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Bye-bye.